So good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to the Bear to Move webinar. Just a couple of technical aspects. If you're joining by phone, you'll be muted during the webinar. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and we'll do our best to answer them all, or we can certainly answer them by email post-webinar. We'll be recording the session, which we made available after the event, with an email on how to access it. So I'm Becky Zuko, founder and director of Wilkin Health, an organisation whose mission is to develop meaningful and relevant programmes to improve people's health and well-being, and to connect our specialist kinesiologists to clients to deliver these programmes in person or remotely. Now, not to dwell on the pandemic, but it has had an enormous impact on all of our lives. Despite social distancing for a large part of it, we seem now to be more stressed and stretched than ever, and struggling to find work-life balance. Yet ironically, this means for many of us, we've become more sedentary, especially those who work from home. How many of you are experiencing back or lower body pain, as well as lacking the motivation to get up and move? We know it will hurt. Simply put, we're not designed like machines and cannot just go from 0 to 100% without consequence. And as we get older, moving regularly becomes so much more important than just fitness. It's for balance and fall prevention, mental health, improved sleep, and maintaining quality of life. Now, barefoot training addresses some of these challenges and takes little space or equipment, and we've got a program that can help. So it's my pleasure to be sharing the value of barefoot training with you and introducing our very special presenters. Dr. Emily Splichal is a podiatrist, human movement specialist, and global leader in barefoot science and rehabilitation. She stands out from any other podiatrist as she has built her teaching around evidence-based principles in facial fitness, foot-to-core sequencing, and barefoot stimulation. And Stuart Wakefield, one of our Wilkin team, is a registered kinesiologist, the Director of Education in Canada for EBFA Global, and Master Instructor for teaching barefoot training specialist workshops in Canada. When treating clients, he focuses on the foot as a foundation of human movement and prescribes based on foot and lower extremity assessments, as well as gait assessments. And Emily Horvat, Wilkin Project Manager and Registered Kinesiologist, will be moderating this evening's webinar. So with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Emily and Stuart to begin their presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much, Becky, for the introduction. And thanks again to Dr. Emily and Stuart for joining us here today. So the purpose of this webinar and why we're all here is because we want to learn about barefoot training and how this can help with previous lower body injuries or current lower body injuries. So Dr. Emily, perhaps you can start us off by explaining a bit more, going into more detail about what barefoot training is.
Absolutely. So barefoot, if you're hearing that word, and you might be thinking of barefoot running. There was obviously a big barefoot running boom that was in 2008, 2009. Don't worry, we're not going to be speaking about barefoot running. This is about taking your shoes off, your socks off, and connecting to the foundation of your body, the foundation of how your nervous system connects to balance, posture, and movement. So when we are going to be referencing barefoot training, this is tapping into that foundational sensory and stabilization gateway into your body. Now, there's some key components that we focus on with barefoot training, which is going to be centered around what's called foot-to-core stability. Now, I've been speaking about how your feet are part of your foundation, but what's interesting is that they actually connect to your body's core or your center. And that is where your center of mass, your center of gravity is really kind of centered around that core. Your core needs to be connected to your foundation, which is your feet. And that's something that is a big part of barefoot training. Another aspect of that is sensory stability. And what that means is that by taking your shoes off, you are accessing the skin in the bottom of the feet. And the skin in the bottom of the feet is very special. It has special nerves that are sensitive to different stimulation. And that stimulation is used to maintain your balance in one place, but also your balance when you walk. So really important to wake up the feet and access the sensory side of the foot. And then finally, your body is very integrated. Your foot is not disconnected from the rest of your body. It is part of how we connect to our brain, which is our nervous system, the way that we breathe, which can be very emotional based, and then barefoot again being that sensory side of movement. So when you think barefoot, I want you to think stability, posture, foot to core, stabilization, and then brain, breath, and barefoot.
Great. So now that we know what barefoot training is, we want to help everyone in the audience today to understand why barefoot training is appropriate for you if you have a busy schedule, if you work from home. And I know we're seeing a lot of this more now working from home because of the pandemic. So speaking of the pandemic, Stuart, can you tell us a bit more about some of the patient journeys that you've seen over the past year and how it's been affected by the pandemic?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's important to kind of go through a little bit of this journey that we've all had to experience over the past, almost 2 years now. It's hard to believe, but just to touch on a few things that have changed. Of course, again, I think it's safe to say all of our lives changed in one way or were affected in some way or another. Since the start of the pandemic. Of course, many people were laid off. As it's been mentioned already, many people started working from home. Lifestyles in general, for the most part, just changed drastically over the past year and a half to 2 years now. I know mine certainly did. I went from spending every day, at the clinic, being on my feet for maybe 8-10 hours a day. I was laid off for about three months from the clinic that I worked with. So again, kind of going from that experience of a lot of activity on a day-to-day basis to being confined to home. And despite, even, with my own knowledge, I knew it was important to exercise. I knew it was important to move, go for walks, etc. I still became much more sedentary. I wasn't on my feet for 8 to 10 hours. I was, sitting at my desk doing more work. So again, I felt the effects of being more sedentary. And then, one of the things that I noticed when I got back to the clinic and started working with people, again, one-on-one and hands-on, a lot of people were coming to us with different types of injuries and really a result of changes in activity. So we've got people who, maybe were fairly sedentary due to the busyness of their life before the pandemic even started. And then, their lives changed. They were at home, so they took the opportunity to go for more walks. Maybe they started to run more. Maybe they were just doing work around their house. Again, just activity changed. And then, of course, there's the flip side. Maybe you went to a gym on a daily basis. You're just a very active person, and then, bam, the pandemic hit, our life changed. There was more stresses in our lives, and maybe it was more difficult to be active on a day-to-day basis. So leading from there, we want to understand, why barefoot training can be so beneficial. And a very simplistic form of exercise that you can do from the comfort of your own, the comfort of your own home. So again, for many of us, exercising, going to the gym, it can be an overwhelming task as it is, pandemic aside. And now you add in COVID restrictions, and it may even become a little bit more daunting. Again, barefoot training is a very simplistic form of exercise. It can be done obviously from home. It can be very fast. It can be very effective, right? You can do, barefoot training programs in, an hour or less, right? If your time is that restricted. And again, minimal equipment is required. I think it's a bit obvious at this point, but obviously you don't even need shoes, right? We're going to use your body weight. You don't need weights. We're going to progress, from double leg exercises to single leg exercises. So again, there's lots of ways to use barefoot training and progress barefoot training in the comfort of your own home. Again, very, very minimal equipment is required. And then the last point on the slide there. So it can be delivered remotely, and we'll get into this a little bit more when we talk about our program here shortly. But ultimately, barefoot training can be a very space, time, and equipment efficient form of movement and exercise.
Stuart, quick question. So little equipment is needed. You can do it, I will say, pretty much anywhere indoors. But what about, some people, since they're working from home all the time, they don't have the motivation to exercise in their house, because if you can sit on your couch, then maybe you choose that, right? So what about, now I know we're here in Canada and the weather's already starting to get a bit chilly. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing it outside, but if the weather's nice, how about doing it outside? Is that an option?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, something that I know Dr. Emily has talked a lot on, grounding, right? You can, be barefoot on the earth is very, very beneficial. There are lots of benefits to grounding. So being barefoot outdoors is absolutely an option. And of course, until, the snow flies, I think it's definitely a reasonable option. So whether you're indoors, outdoors, barefoot training is a fantastic and very, again, simplistic way to exercise.
Great. It's good to know. Good to know. All right. So as you just mentioned as well, like a lot of us are leading more sedentary lifestyles, and we're possibly experiencing more pain, like you had mentioned. But I guess a main question that we have for you, Stuart, is why do our feet actually hurt? Like, what is causing this pain?
For sure. Yeah, it's a great question. And we don't even necessarily have to isolate the foot here or feet here. We can consider ankle pain, knee pain, hip pain, even low back pain. So let's look at the three things that we've got on the slide here. Number one being a lack of movement. And again, there's lots of different ways that we could take this, but to just keep it, somewhat general based on, again, what we've already talked about with the pandemic, maybe more of us becoming sedentary. Ultimately, our bodies were meant to move, right? We're bipedal beings. We're meant to walk. There's a lot of benefits to regular and consistent movement. But then you can look at, as the pandemic changed things, if our body was accustomed to movement, if we were, working out on a regular basis, and then all of a sudden we just became more sedentary, it's not going to surprise me if you all of a sudden start to experience pain or just maybe significant stiffness. You wake up in the morning and it feels hard to move. Again, our bodies were meant to move. Our fascial system, or connective tissue, this really thin layer of tissue that surrounds all of our muscles, our bones, our organs, it's hydrated through movement. And essentially what that means is the less we move, the more stiff we're going to get. And as a result of that, we're going to be more susceptible to injuries and just pain in general. So again, there are lots of different scenarios that we could cover, but a lack of movement is definitely one of the areas in which we could point to from a pain perspective. And then the second point here, poor nutrition. Again, we could spend a ton of time here discussing different concepts with regards to nutrition and pain. But if we, again, just make it fairly simplistic, if we look at poor nutrition, just diets that are high in processed foods, diets that are high in sugar, sugary foods are going to make connective tissue sticky. This connective tissue, or fascia that I already mentioned, right? It's meant to be elastic. It's meant to have this elastic recoil. So you can kind of think of it like a bow and arrow, or maybe a slingshot. But when we move well, a lot of our efficiency comes from our fascial system. And of course, when you combine possibly becoming more sedentary, and then you combine some of the poor nutritional habits that we may have developed over the past year and a half or so, it's really starting to put together this sort of, I guess, recipe for pain, you could say. And then lastly, the point here, your feet can't feel. A couple slides ago, I know Dr. Emily referenced sensory stability, and that's just a really efficient way to understand how our sensory system really dictates how our body stabilizes itself. So again, if we can't feel the ground that we're moving on or trying to move on, it could definitely result in foot pain, ankle pain, knee pain, hip pain. Again, you can just work your way up the body. We need to appreciate that the feet are very much like our hands. Again, Dr. Emily mentioned this already, but our feet and our hands are very sensory rich. And again, they're going to give our brain a ton of information about what we're feeling, how we're moving, etc. Again, we're sensory beings, and we need to feel the ground to move efficiently and ultimately reduce our chances of injury as a result of, again, feeling the ground. So again, sensory stability is definitely a key benefit of barefoot training. You're taking your shoes off, you're taking your socks off. You're basically just, taking away all these barriers to feeling the ground. And again, the ability to feel dictates our ability to stabilize and again, be efficient with our movement. And again, as it says on the slides, ultimately these three things are very, very controllable. Three things that we address in the program that we're going to talk about here shortly. But again, they're very controllable, and they're all very much within your power to change and start leading a more active and pain-free life.
Thanks, Stuart. So when you say, that your feet can't feel, but if you take off the barrier so that, sensors in your feet help you, you said stabilize as well. So as in this could help with balance if we have some balance issues, is that, so it's not just pain, it could help with other elements of just physical function?
For sure. Yeah. So if balance is a concern, it doesn't have to be pain. And then again, this is something that we talk about. And again, Dr. Emily could certainly expand on this, but we talk a lot about in EBFA education, just, as we age, if we're not training these systems, especially our sensory system, it can decline naturally with age. And again, balance is very much dependent on our ability to, again, feel the ground, especially dynamically. So as we move, again, if we can't feel the ground, we might start to shorten our stride. And I know Dr. Emily has talked a lot about, shorter strides and longevity as a whole, right? So taking good long strides is really dependent on our ability to balance on a single leg. And that's one of the reasons why we do a lot of single leg training as a progression in the program that we'll talk about here shortly. But again, feeling the ground, taking those longer strides, being able to balance on a single leg is all very, very important and benefits of barefoot training. Sure.
Great, thanks. So coming back to the pain though, so now we know, the three possibilities of why our feet could hurt. So the question that normally comes up next is, well, what next? So I have this foot pain, what do I do next? And I think a vast majority of people will, if they have a chronic pain, they end up at their family doctor, and they're normally suggested that they get orthotics. But Dr. Emily, in your opinion, are orthotics always necessary? Is that the go-to?
So this is probably one of the biggest debates that is out there and lots of myths. But what I want people to think about is that we all have, or a majority of us, because there's exceptions to every rule, but a majority of us have the potential to maintain the strength to control our foot and our arch statically and dynamically. We just need to actually train our feet just like we train our core, our hips, our back muscles, our core muscles. So everything posturally and movement based still needs to be trained. So if you are currently using orthotics and you're a little bit hesitant about getting out of them and doing some of the barefoot movements that Stuart's been referencing a little bit and teasing us that the program has some single leg balance exercises that are barefoot in there. These are 100% safe for people who are currently using orthotics. They're actually really important. And any patient that I give orthotics to, I still give barefoot foot specific strengthening exercises. So perhaps you don't need the orthotics, right? Of course, consult with a medical professional, but our arches are designed to be controlled through our own mechanism, through muscles and tendons and integrated core and glute strengthening. So there are some research studies that actually show that strengthening your glutes is an effective way to control and actually lift the arch. And this is really, really important to understand, because when I have a patient that's considering orthotics, or they think they need orthotics, and maybe they have mild collapse of their arch, if I do 6 weeks of glute strengthening and foot to core strengthening, you can actually get the average correction that a starter or traditional orthotic will control the foot, which means the exact same results. And I'd rather go for the more natural way than this artificial arch support. Another thing is that when I do look at orthotics, I want them to be temporary. So Emily, you had mentioned pain. So if someone actively has pain, using orthotics to temporarily support the foot and the tissue so it can take a break can help the clients or the patients calm things down. And then when the tissue is calmed down, you start getting into foot strengthening and a lot of the exercises that are integrated with the Bear to Move program so that you no longer need the orthotics and you are out of pain. And again, there's exceptions to every rule, but a majority of patients, that's where they're going to fall versus becoming reliant on something that is artificial, such as the orthotics.
Great. So I heard you mention that you do use orthotics sometimes with some of your clientele. It is something that some individuals actually need on a more permanent basis, or not?
Some do, yes. And the ones that actually do need it. So if people are like, well, what's those exceptions, right? What are the exceptions to the rule, right? I'm just leaving you hanging there. The exceptions to the rule are typically a ligament laxity. So a more moderate to severe flat foot that has a genetic ligament laxity or hypermobility component to it. So we know that there's this structural component. It's typically more on the severe side. And usually they'll have actual symptoms. So a history of plantar fasciitis or post-tib tendinitis and things like that. If you're more on this mild to moderate, no ligament laxity, it's more of a strength component or an inactivity component, then I would definitely say looking more at the foot strengthening, core strengthening, and glute strengthening.
Great. So I have another question here. It says, after I walk a lot, my arches are very tired and sore right after. Why is that? And what can I do to alleviate this feeling? Can you shed some light on that?
Absolutely. So walking, as Stuart had mentioned, is very important. It places a lot of stress on your body. Every time you take a step and you strike the ground, you're actually getting impact forces, ground reaction forces, that your muscles have to absorb that energy. And then technically you're supposed to use that energy to take the next step. It's the recoil component of the body. However, that takes work to do that, to load the energy, to transfer the energy. And depending on your foot type or depending on your foot strength, you may exhaust that mechanism, that contraction of the foot, and then you start to get fatigue. Now, certain foot types fatigue easier. Flatter feet fatigue easier than a neutral or a higher arch. So is it a foot type issue? Is it a strength issue? Or is it just the volume of the stress? So maybe you walked, I'm in the US, I'll use miles. So many miles versus, what you're used to doing, and just the volume of stress went up. So that's how I look at it. Now, regardless of it being your foot type, maybe the muscle strength or just the volume of stress, your go-to should always be recovery. So you are releasing your feet at the end of the day or after that walk, and make sure that you are balancing stress with recovery to offset any sort of threshold so that you actually get this acute plantar fasciitis. That's what we're trying to avoid.
So in other words, if you go for a longer walk, make sure that you can rest before possibly going for another long walk. Is that what we're saying then?
Yeah, time is a good recovery. Releasing feet is recovery. Absolutely.
Sure. Great.
And if I can add in there, that I think really goes back, like that question goes back to, what I saw as a clinician, when I went back to work after the pandemic had started. It's just, again, volume of stress, right? So we have, these people who, were stuck at home and they had nothing to do but go out and go for walks or go for a run. And that became sort of maybe a daily outlet for them. So it was all of a sudden something that they were new to, and then they started doing it every day. Right. So again, just this volume of stress that Dr. Emily referenced without the proper know-how in terms of recovery. So obviously very important to, recover and have that knowledge. And then just, from a programming standpoint, that's, a huge component of this Bear to Move program that we'll touch on more shortly here. Just, learning how to recover, knowing, what your body can handle, and then just, progressive overload, essentially.
Great. So we actually mentioned this briefly for impact. So another common question or misconception that we wanted to address regarding foot and lower body injuries has to do with impact. So we're often told that impact is bad for us. That you're told stick to low impact exercises like biking or elliptical. Running's bad for you. You're going to ruin your knees, etc. So, Stuart, we are wondering if you can help us understand if this is true, and what is impact and how can we not avoid it, but safely.
Yeah, for sure. So again, that previous question was a great segue into this. And I have to, definitely reference Dr. Emily for the statement on the top here, but I absolutely love viewing impact as a gift. And this is a conversation that I probably have with clients on a daily basis. I think we really need to start to change this mentality around impact. Oh, it's bad for us. It's bad for my knees. I need low impact this, low impact that. We really need to take this false sense of impact. And again, like I said, just change the mentality around it and view it, as a gift, view it as free energy from the ground, essentially. So, Dr. Emily touched on it a little bit already, but, how do we take advantage of this free energy? We've touched on it a little bit already, but step number one is essentially the fact that we have to be able to feel it in order to control it, right? If we can't feel it, then we have no chance. So that's sort of, step number one. Then, here we can circle back to the benefits of barefoot training, being barefoot, moving barefoot, incorporating barefoot training, incorporating stability work from your foot to your core is going to allow you to take that impact, essentially load it into your connective tissue, your fascial system that we've touched on already. And like I said, that fascial recoil is very, very important. And it's going to allow us to, again, use impact very efficiently and as a gift. So we can view impact as essentially this energy coming into our body that allows us to take the next step. And again, just, appreciating that if we can't feel it, we can't stabilize against it, we're going to start fighting gravity. We're going to start fighting the ground, essentially. And it's going to deter us from, wanting to get up and move, right? So if movement becomes hard, we're not going to want to do it. And again, that's, a key aspect or a key component that with barefoot training, we're going to improve that relationship with gravity and the ground and allow you to move with more stability and therefore more efficiency. I always use the analogy with clients. Emily mentioned already that, as we get, especially in Canada here, we get closer to the winter months, pretty soon we're all going to be starting to put on thick pairs of winter gloves, right? And again, just imagine putting on a thick pair of winter gloves and trying to do fine motor skills like typing on your cell phone or tying your shoelaces. Those tasks become next to impossible when we're in, those thick winter gloves. And ultimately that's because we're blocking that sensory information, and being in shoes 24/7, socks 24/7. Again, we're blocking that information that our brain ultimately uses to control our body and move with, like I said, stability and ultimately efficiency. So we need to be able to control our body through movement by, again, feeling and sensing the ground. And of course, if we want to continue to move well with age, if you want to chase after your kids, maybe your grandkids, continue to play certain sports that you love. Again, understanding this relationship with gravity and the ground or impact, I think is a very important consideration, and definitely something that we address in our Bear to Move program.
So Stuart, what do you say to running then? Because I think running is a high impact sport, but how do you do that safely, like without injury? Because you can't, well, I personally wouldn't want to run through the streets without my shoes on. So like what can you tell us about that?
For sure. It's definitely a loaded question.
Oh, yeah.
We have to appreciate, obviously, the surface that we're on. Most of us, just from an easy access standpoint, are going to go out. We're going to end up running on concrete. So that would be a time where cushion could potentially be beneficial. Concrete is not a surface that vibrates, right? So we're going to get this sort of skewed sense of information from concrete anyways. So again, cushion can be very beneficial when you are running. I think with runners, at least my philosophy with runners is, again, outside of their running, right? They need to do cross training. They need to do, they need to move their bodies in different ways in all planes of motions. Again, just, be competent movers outside of just that running gait cycle. So again, I think it's important to, take some of the concepts we've talked about, and again, outside of their running, they need to do barefoot training. They need to improve their ability to feel the ground. They need to improve that ability to stabilize. We've already talked about the importance of balance on a single leg. Again, that's just as important, obviously, with running as it is with walking, because when we're running, we're only ever on one leg. Right. So that single leg stability and control from your foot to your pelvis or your core is going to be really, really important then as well. So cushion and shoes is definitely a good consideration when running, especially if you are running on concrete. And then again, just taking into account a lot of the things that we've talked about already, improving sensory feedback, improving this whole foot to core stability that we've talked about. These things are going to definitely help runners be more efficient. And again, as a runner, efficiency is everything, right? You think about taking thousands and thousands of steps. If you go out for a 10, 20, maybe 30 kilometer run, you obviously need to be efficient with each and every step that you take.
For sure. So another question along similar lines here. So since COVID-19, I stopped my usual walking for fear of getting the virus. But since restrictions are easing, I'm trying to be more mobile, but find my lower legs ache. What can I do to improve? Either Stuart or Dr. Emily, feel free to jump in.
So you want me to jump in? Okay. So that would be kind of that similar period of sudden increase in stress. Just in this case, it's not the bottom of the foot, it's the lower leg, so the calf. And if you were maybe sitting a little bit more during COVID versus walking, and you're in a knee flexed position, that can tighten the back of the legs. So we're just starting to get restricted mobility. Stuart mentioned in the beginning, he had the slide about lack of movement can create stasis or tightness in connective tissue. And then when you do go to do an activity, you're going to hit a fatigue point. So I would go back to my exact same recommendations of recovery. Instead of releasing the bottom of your feet this time, I would also release the back of your legs, your calves, and make sure that you are bringing fresh circulation, you're massaging the muscles, and you're hydrating the fascial tissue.
Would any kind of stretching help with that?
You can definitely stretch. I am more of a fan of myofascial work, so more like trigger point release, whether that's foam rolling, or a lot of people are now using these percussive guns. So if you've seen on the internet and things like that, Theragun is an example, Hyper Ice, there's many different percussive devices that are out there. They are a good way to release, and I'm going to quote the massage that I'm referencing.
Great, perfect, thank you. So if we move on from here, now we've finally arrived at the actual Bare to Move program that we've been mentioning throughout this talk. So I'll just move to the next slide. So our Bare to Move program is a 12-week exercise and lifestyle program. So it's not just exercise. We try and incorporate things that will actually help you perhaps change or modify or enhance your lifestyle. It's remotely delivered. So it's in the comfort of your home. I think Stuart already mentioned it's flexible in timing, so it easily works around your schedule. And we focus on progressive strengthening and staying pain-free. So Stuart, perhaps you could walk us through some more of the specific benefits of the program, though.
Yeah, for sure. So I think the foundation to any good, whether it's a rehabilitation program or a fitness program, the foundation to that has to be an assessment. We have to understand how you're moving now, so we can learn, whether you're, you need more mobility, you need more stability, or maybe a combination of both. So the program is going to include an assessment, will include a reassessment. Again, the main focus here is going to be determining your foot posture. And again, when it comes to postural position of the feet, that's going to help us understand whether you do need more stability. And as an example, if you had more of a flexible flat foot type, we're going to need to, again, provide you with more stability, especially that foot to core stability that we had talked about. Versus if you're someone who has, a fairly high arch, more of a rigid foot, then we're going to work more on mobility. And then, like I said, there's going to be lots of different variations where there will be a combination of both stability and mobility work. If you do have pain, understanding your foot posture can be really critical in helping to alleviate your pain. And again, it doesn't have to be foot pain, right? It can, if we look at just foot postural imbalances, of course, that can lead to, like we've talked about, foot pain, ankle pain, knee pain, hip pain, again, just to name a few, right? So we want to understand your foundation, essentially. So then following your assessment, a kinesiologist who's certified with the Barefoot Training Specialist program is going to take you through this 12-week program that's designed to improve, again, your ability to feel the ground. So we're going to work on, again, sensory stimulus, improve foot to core stability that we've talked about, and then ultimately improve your ability to move efficiently and, of course, most importantly, pain-free. One of my favorite aspects of this program that we're going to give you is, strategies to help control stress, to deal with stress. That's something obviously that we've all had to deal with through the course of the pandemic, which is, hopefully nearing its end. But again, we're going to talk about stress control. We're going to use breathing techniques that you can use on a daily basis. We want you to understand, how stress can affect, your nervous system in a way that's going to affect your body's ability to stabilize. So it's really important to make that connection between stress and stability. And of course, we'll give you the tools to help you with that. And then, of course, the beauty of the program is that we can meet you where you're starting from. So if you are already, maybe a fit and active person, but you're dealing with certain specific nagging injuries, or if you're just wanting to start being active again, but maybe are hesitant because of injuries or pain that you've experienced in the past, again, we can kind of meet you where you're starting from and really help, build up that the ability to move well again, to move pain-free, to move efficiently, however you want to term it. And again, we'll give you the tools to be able to do that, again, from the comfort of your own home in a very efficient manner.
Great. So we have some questions here. For someone who has been diagnosed with arthritis in the feet, can these exercises help? Dr. Emily, maybe you want to take this one.
Sure. Yeah. So absolutely to that. A lot of arthritis, whether it's osteoarthritis, which is a degenerative wearing down of the joints, or rheumatoid arthritis, those are the two most common arthritis, which is more of a autoimmune inflammatory condition. Doing the sensory stimulation, getting the circulation that you get from barefoot movement, and then strengthening the foot muscles. So supporting the joints through these small muscles is really what you want to be focusing on with any type of arthritis in the foot and the ankle. Of course, you'll be taken through individualized. So if anything is bothering you, there's going to be modifications that the kinesiologist will be offering you, but absolutely, arthritis in the feet needs something to be done to the feet every single day, whether it's just a little bit of a stimulation, a reset, or a strengthening.
So it comes back to that question again of lack of movement is not ideal. And therefore, even with arthritis, we want to do something on a daily basis to keep the fascia healthy and moving, right?
Absolutely.
Perfect. So another question here. I noticed that after a long day, my ankles and feet are a bit swollen. Can this program help me?
I would say yes on my side of that, for a similar reason, that for any of the listeners, if they're thinking, I have arthritis, or I had a history of plantar fasciitis, or I get diffuse foot pain or foot fatigue, or my ankles are swelling, my calves get tight, is a lot of times the same driver of that, which is lack of movement. To go to that, something that is insufficient stimulation. You're not getting the calf pump going, which is really important. Maybe your feet don't feel. So it really does go back to that slide that Stuart was referencing in the beginning of those three big things. And that's a key part of the program. And I'll let kind of Stuart add in as well, but I think he really hit it on the head with those three main reasons of why calves, feet, swollen, arthritis, foot fatigue may be presenting for any of the listeners.
For sure, we need to move. It's kind of what it comes down to. Movement is so critical for all of those things that were just mentioned.
Definitely sense the common theme. All right, so I don't have any other questions at the moment, but we are almost at the end of our presentation. So if there are any last burning questions, feel free to type them in at the moment. But I'll just move on to our next slide. All right, so we have set up for you, for the listeners today, a free group online consultation with Stuart. Thank you, Stuart. So if you have any injury concerns and you want to connect directly with Stuart, we'll have it, it'll be in group. There is limited space, but you can register your interest with us to do so. And if you would like to start the program next week, then we will offer an additional session to the 12-week program. So it'll be a 13-week program instead. So if you are interested, please reach out to julie@wilkin.ca. You'll see the email on the screen. But we will also email you after this webinar, and all of the links and emails will be included so you can connect with us. So I don't think I have any other questions come in. So with that, I'd like to thank both Dr. Emily and Stuart for an amazing and comprehensive presentation on barefoot training and speaking about Wilkin's Bear to Move program. And thank you to all of our listeners for joining the webinar today. If you do think of any questions afterwards, like I said, the free online consultation, but don't hesitate to reach out to us at any point. Look out for that email later on. And with that, I wish you a good rest of the day. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Emily.
All right.
Thank you.